Guys, so today I want to talk about a study that was really interesting, and it is all about failure, and specifically startup failure. So the whole point of this study, the reason that the authors did all of this research, was to try to diminish the rate of startup failure. And they mentioned in the study that 84% of startups fail within the first 7 years of their implementation. And that is a crazy number. I'm sure most of us would not go into a venture or go into an endeavor that has an 84% chance of failure. But as we know, startups are really energizing and people really want to follow their passions. And the authors of this study want to help people follow their passions, and they want to teach them better frameworks of how to actually get profits and get results and create great product market fit and not have to fail in their startup. So before I tell you about the study, I want to mention that this type of methodology can be applied to anywhere. It can be applied to your team at a big corporation. It can be applied to your project. It can be applied to your small business. And of course, it can be applied to a startup. So in this study, these Italian authors got a bunch of startups from Italy. They got over 100 startups, and they put the startups into two groups. There is the treatment group and the control group. As any of you know that have been into a grad program, or maybe you did research in your undergrad, typically there is a control group in every scientific study. And in this case, the treatment group and the control group were very similar. They were all early stage startups, and they all received a certain type of training, and they received the training for the same amount of time, and both groups were monitored over the course of an entire year. So the control group received the type of traditional training that we would kind of think of when we think of business and kind of startups, the lean methodology and kind of MBA program type of deal. And so they went and got all of these lectures and kind of training calls with based on this methodology. And then the treatment group, what they got was similar, but they received a methodology that was grounded in the scientific method. So I'm going to talk more about this and tell you guys exactly what they taught them and exactly what happened with these groups. First, let's talk about the results. The treatment group, the group that got the scientific methodology training, they actually were 8.6 times more profitable than the control group. And you can kind of think of the control group as kind of the regular status quo type of deal. In addition, the scientific group, the treatment group, engaged in significantly more pivots than the control group. And a pivot is any time that a startup really changes course drastically in their product, in their idea, etc. Okay, so what was this kind of methodology that resulted in less startup failure, in kind of having more profits and better results? So the methodology is really the scientific method. These startup founders were essentially taught to think like scientists instead of like business people, or instead of like whatever kind of training they had before they came into the startup. And what this really comprises of is just 3 steps. And these 3 steps are hypothesis, data collection, and evaluation. And many of you remember hypothesis from elementary or middle school, and this is crucial. It is crucial to form a hypothesis before doing any type of data collection. The authors talk a lot about bias in this study, and they find that a lot of founders, a lot of business leaders have significant biases when it comes to their ideas. You know, our ideas are almost like our babies. Like, we don't want them to be disproven. We want to believe what we want to believe. And a lot of times, in these early stage type of startups, having any type of negation of your idea feels so vulnerable. The thing is that not getting feedback, not having the hypothesis tested, not having the idea evaluated often leads to significantly less profit and significantly more failure. And so creating this hypothesis, the ability to test your idea, is crucial. In the example that they gave, they found that a startup had kind of 4 features that they wanted to implement. This startup was a marketplace for tattoo artists. It was called Inkdome. That was their case study in the study that they presented. And so this ink marketplace, tattoo artist marketplace, it was basically meant for people to try to find tattoo artists to really kind of help them create the designs and the tattoos that they want to make on their bodies. And so they had 4 hypotheses that they wanted to test. The first one was tattooed people do not always use the same tattoo artist. And the second one was that they choose new tattoo artists online. The third was that it takes time and it is painful to get a tattoo. And wait, no, I think it is painful to find a tattooist, but it is also painful to get a tattoo, but that wasn't related to this. And then 4, tattooed people can find online all the information that they need to make their choice. And so with these four hypotheses, they would be related to 4 features that the marketplace would have. And so Inkdome was in the scientific group, so they created the hypotheses, and they also made sure that these hypotheses were falsifiable. It is so, so important to create a hypothesis that can be disproven. So you got your hypothesis, it is falsifiable, it is clear, and so you move on to the data collection phase. And what the authors of this study noticed was that a lot of startups collect data. They do a really good job at this. They put out surveys. They are really gung-ho on data. They love having the data in their pitch deck in like a nice pie chart, etc. And so most of us can relate. Like, we all kind of like having data. We all think that, you know, if you have a pie chart or bar graph in your presentation, it's a little bit better, right? The thing is that they found that a lot of entrepreneurs were not collecting data in a scientifically valid way, and actually the data might actually be hurting their long-term success. One example that they offered was that a lot of founders, a lot of team members in a startup would create surveys, and then they would distribute the surveys on their own social networks. And so in science, we call this a self-selection bias. So if you only distribute the survey to a certain population, in this case, this population is people who know you, you're going to have a bias in the data that would not be the same if you had distributed it to a wider audience. And this is really important because the issue is that your friends and family are not necessarily the customers of your startup or your business idea. And so if you're only surveying your friends and family, that doesn't really give you great data. In addition, your friends and family are probably biased to give you more positive survey responses. And this again skews your data. So when it comes to distributing surveys, it is crucial to find really the group and the demographic that would actually be using your product. In Inkdome's example, they actually found message boards and Facebook groups of people that are tattoo enthusiasts, and they distributed the surveys there, and they were people that none of the founders knew, so it was not subject to that self-selection bias. A second thing that the authors note is that a lot of startups do not write survey questions in a neutral way, in a scientific way, and oftentimes they write questions such as, you know, would you like to use this product? Yes or no? And they claim that that is kind of validation of product market fit. And that's a very leading question because it makes the survey taker feel like, oh yeah, I would like to use that product. It almost like primes you to use the product. And combine that with distributing the survey to friends and family, you're going to get like these amazing results that are not necessarily indicative of the actual market. So the authors really encouraged the science-based startups to use questions that were very neutral, very scientifically valid. So an example of this would be something like, on a scale of 1 to 7, how likely are you to use this product? So 1 could be not likely at all, and then 7 could be very likely. And then the survey taker would be able to select a range of results, and that could give you better data instead of just using kind of like a yes or no answer. So now that you've collected good data, scientifically valid data, you can move on to the valuation phase. And I think this is actually the crucial phase because a lot of us actually form little hypotheses in our everyday lives, in our work, and we do actually kind of gather data to test these. And the data might not be super scientifically valid, but we do it. what I've noticed is that a lot of us don't go into this third phase, which is the valuation phase. The reason I think that this is the hardest phase is because it really sets up a concrete kind of potential for failure. And because you know that if in Inkdom's case, if they got less than 60% kind of positive results in their surveys, then they know that they were wrong about a certain feature. And so a lot of us really, really have a fear of failure. We don't want to be wrong, especially when you're kind of trying to create something new, trying to, really create a new company, a new startup. It can be a very vulnerable time. And the issue is that if we hold on too closely to those ideas, if we were too scared to fail, then we cannot validate our ideas properly. And this is why the scientific method is so great, is because it really comes at failure in such a neutral way. A false hypothesis and a true hypothesis are equal. And I know when it comes to publishing scientific studies, that is not the case, but I think most scientists would agree that that is not the ideal state. The ideal state of science would really have this kind of neutral way of viewing a false and a true hypothesis. So when it comes to really kind of gathering the data and evaluating the data, if your hypothesis is disproven, that does not mean you are wrong. That does not mean your idea was bad. That does not mean your startup is a failure. That just means that you have data because you're a scientist. And as a scientist, any data is good data. And I really love kind of using this method and thinking like this because it allows us to have a more healthy relationship with failure. And it allows us to have a more healthy relationship with disproving our own ideas. And as we know, failure is a part of innovation. We know that Pablo Picasso painted, I think, around 50,000 paintings, and most of us have not seen those paintings. We've only seen a few of them. We know that Thomas Edison famously failed 10,000 times before he invented the light bulb. Failure is kind of the price we pay for innovation. And what I really offer in this video is that it does not have to be a painful price. It can just be what it is. It is just information. And that is a really cool thing, I think. And I really hope that this video was helpful to anyone that's really trying to start something new or trying to validate an idea. And I will see you guys next week with another video.